Oh, very good. I hit the thing. Got it. I got it.
Hi everybody. Welcome. I'm Allison Williams of the Copper Queen Library, Library Services Coordinator. And I'm really happy to welcome all of you here tonight for Margo Macartney's new book, Under the Wheels of Justice. First, I do just want to make a quick announcement that the best friends of the Copper Queen Library are coming up towards their Altered Books, which is a silent auction and art show. It's the 11th year, and it's on August 27th. That's a Saturday at Central School Project.
No, it's not. That's an important point, Allison. I'm so sorry. The 27th is a Friday. We always have them on Saturdays, and this year we're having it on Friday.
I think the poster is Thursday through Saturday. So Thursday for viewing, Friday is the event on the 26th. Is that correct? Okay.
Right.
So
Right.
what are the dates? When do we have to have something in by?
Thursday. I think.
That's right.
Thursday the
Or
26th?
is it Wednesday? Well,
I don't have it in front of me, sorry.
we'll have that that poster.
Margo, I'll get back to you. Yeah.
Well, you'll have that information out well before August, the end of August.
But I just wanted to remind everybody that if you are planning on making an altered book, that the Friends Bookstore will give you a book for free or two.
Oh, isn't that great?
And we will be doing altered books at Open Art Studio the first and third Friday of August at the Copper Queen Library Annex in San Jose. And so we are going to have some supplies there too, and that's with Gretchen Hill. So I'm very excited about that. So now I would like to welcome Margo Macartney. And Margo is just such an integral part of our community and in so many ways. But her career previously as an attorney, she was a legal defender for the Cochise County Legal Defender's Office in Bisbee. And I personally love talking to defenders, defense attorneys. It's a whole different ball game than prosecution. And
oh yes,
and and they're a breed that is really under duress in this country. It's a constitutional right to have an attorney, and we need more legal defenders. And so to be able to hear a story from one and to understand the role that they play in our judicial system, and the premise that everybody is innocent until proven guilty. And so there's much more to say about Margo, but she has written a book, Under the Wheels of Justice, and I am just super excited to welcome you, Margo.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. I never in my life imagined I'd be doing something like this. I never thought I'd write a book about this. The book, I went to law school late in life. I think I was 50 years old when I graduated from law school, and people said, well, no one's going to ever ask you when you were licensed. They want to know if you're licensed. And so I proceeded on that. I did a lot of bankruptcy and some civil work in Reno, and then I moved to Arizona, and I moved to Bisbee to take a job in the legal defender's office, which was brand new at the time. They had a public defender's office, and there were so many cases, they wanted a second office to represent other people, because when you have a case, if there's a burglary, for instance, and there are two defendants, they cannot have the same attorney or an attorney in the same office because the information would get all screwed around. So every defendant has to have their own, his or her own attorney. So the legal defender's office was brand new when I moved here. And I took a position as a deputy legal defender. I had done minimal criminal law until then. And our office handled felonies. We didn't do misdemeanors at that time. Other people did. I can't remember how the misdemeanors were handled, but what we did was felony work, and it was my first experience with that. And that was at the end of 1991 that I started. And and 5 years later, I had my first murder case, which was just a god-awful case. There was absolutely no doubt that the client had murdered this woman. And I worked with the guy who was the head of the department, who neither of us had enough experience. We should never have been assigned a first-degree murder case because neither of us had enough experience in death penalty cases to handle one. But we did anyway. And naturally we lost, and the case was finally overturned, and we were actually found to be terribly incompetent. On the heels of that case, another case came in the door, and that was a case I had read about. It was in the Tucson papers. A body was found outside of Wilcox, and I was assigned to represent a young guy who had just turned 19 years old, and who was accused of first-degree murder. As it turned out, it was a case that the book goes into the whole story of this case. The boy had been living with a bunch of people for less than 2 weeks. He had found himself homeless because his father had a conviction for child molestation. And his father had been living with his girlfriend who had 2 daughters. So one day, probably a week or so after Justin, my client was his name is Justin, after he had moved in there, the police came and said, you have to leave. And so Justin had to leave too. So his dad was living in his car, and he said, well, you can't live with me. I'll give you some money and you can get a hotel room. He had just turned 18 at that point, or I don't know. He had turned 18 in January, and this was in August. So he didn't do that. Anyway, I will read part of the book, the introduction to the book. I wound up writing the book because I was so upset at what I perceived as everything going against this kid who had nothing to do with murdering this boy. There was an 18-year-old boy that was murdered. And Justin had been kind of held in the room. He was murdered by somebody else. Here's my introduction. It was 1:30 a.m. in the rural southeast Arizona desert when a 22-year-old man put on dark glasses and got into a car. The car was not his, and the glasses were a disguise, so no one would recognize him. He drove for 2 hours from Wilcox to Tucson. The car he was driving had belonged to an 18-year-old boy he had just killed. He needed help and called 3 friends who agreed to meet him. He asked them to help him distribute the victim's clothes in trash containers all over the city, wipe all prints from the car, remove the license plate, and hide the car where it would not likely be found. He bragged to his friends that he had lost it and killed the guy because the guy wanted to screw my girlfriend. The friends were not surprised. The next day, Tom, one of those friends, relayed the entire story to a complete stranger, a guy he obviously thought would understand. He told the guy that the body was buried in the desert not far from Wilcox and gave the first name of his friend, the killer, Cody. Tom's account also included the fact that Cody had worked for the Wilcox Police Department and that Cody's father was a, quote, big shot cop. The stranger who heard this story did not understand and was horrified. He shared the story with his wife, and the next day they reported it to the police. At the time, 22-year-old Cody was living with 2 18-year-old girls, one of whom was his girlfriend, and an 18-year-old boy whom the girls had invited to stay with them 13 days before the murder. That's the introduction to the story. These girls had rented a house. It was actually, and this is in the book, they had graduated from Wilcox High School in May. They got jobs, rented the house, and they knew it was vacant because Cody had just been evicted with a bunch of guys and had been told never to live there by the real estate agent. Said, you must never live here. So he got someplace else to live. His girlfriend and her friend rented the house. They moved in, so did Cody. And there was another boy initially who was the boyfriend of the other young woman. And he didn't last very long and he left, which is just part of the story, which is in there. So in the meantime, poor Justin was camping out in the park, trying to stay alive, because he didn't want to use the money his father gave him for a motel, because he thought he would need food more than a place to stay. It was summer. So, and he ran into one of the girls, Annalie, that he had met these 2 girls at a party the year before. And the girl very generously said, listen, if you need a place to stay, why don't you stay with us? He had gotten a job, but he couldn't take the job until he found his Social Security card, which had been lost in the shuffle of the move with it was somewhere in his father's car, but he couldn't find it anywhere because his father's car was filled with boxes of his father's stuff. So he said, okay, I'll sleep on your couch. And so he slept on the couch. And then when the other boy left, they gave Justin the other boy's bedroom. And there he was for 13 days living with these 2 girls and this big guy. Cody was 6'4" and weighed almost 300 pounds. And at the time was working as a mechanic at an auto shop. The boy who was killed, Justin didn't know him. The only person who knew this boy was Cody's girlfriend, Desley, who had known him when they were 15. And I guess the kid had carried a torch for Desley for 3 years. They wrote and called periodically and stayed in touch. And this kid, Chad, called up and said, you know, I just graduated from high school and I worked all summer and I have a car. Can I come visit? And she said, sure. She was really excited about it. She told everybody in the house, Chad is coming to visit. They said, okay, Chad is coming to visit. It's a chilling story. It is one of the most chilling stories that I have ever encountered. And much of what is in the book, I encountered as I was writing the book, a lot of the insights that I had at the time, it was a murder case, and there were, oh my goodness, we had 2 defendants, 2 defense attorneys, 2 prosecutors, and hundreds of investigators and police. And we had interviews that went on for over a year with all the witnesses, with both girls. The only people who were not interviewed were Cody, the killer, and Justin, who was there, who was present when all this happened. I don't think I want to. How many people have read the book? Okay, Kathy's read the book. Okay, I don't want to give the whole book away, so I won't go into all the details, but it's a pretty chilling story. When I wrote the book, I put it in the third person. The first part of it's in 2 parts. There's part 1 and part 2. I think there's just 2 parts, part 1 and part 2. There's 3 trials: the crime, the investigation, and the trial. And I didn't put it in the first person until we got to the investigation, because I wasn't involved. I just told the story the way it was. The story, there's dialogue, is put together from interviews that I remember, and some of which I had made a note of. The most chilling thing was that Cody had told everybody that he had killed this boy, and then he blamed it on Justin. He called his dad. I think after I realize now, because I've been in touch with my client, who's now 45 years old. He's no longer a kid, and he was not picked up until a week or 2 after Cody had been picked up. Everyone in Wilcox knew Cody had done this, everybody. And but when he was arrested, his father, and it's not clear to me, there's some discussion that they weren't close. His father had been kind of disgusted with him and didn't have much to do with him, and then found out that he had been arrested for murder. So he went to see him at the Cochise County Jail. The jail gave his dad carte blanche, use the office of the guy, the top guy for your interview. We don't want to humiliate you by having to visit your son in regular client visitation. So he interviewed Cody, and he apparently said, you better tell me what's going on. And Cody said, I didn't do this, Justin did it. And so shortly thereafter, Justin was picked up. They had been he was in Tucson. And throughout the trial, my sense was that Cody's lawyer was Ruben Tehran, who had like 30 years of experience as a criminal defense lawyer and had done hundreds of murder cases. And our office was representing poor Justin. And between Jim and I, we might have had 12 years of experience and one first-degree murder that the 2 of us had handled together poorly before. And of course, then there was Ruben. And it felt throughout the trial as though it was Ruben and the prosecutor against Justin. And that's how it worked from my point of view. And this book is my point of view, of course. Let me see. The timelines are really interesting because The killing was on August 22nd. And it was the next day, August 23rd, in Tucson, or it was Rio Rico, where this kid slopped this whole story out to some strangers. That was the next day. And within then, let's see, on the 29th of August, the thing is, when it got back, the Tucson attorney got back to the detective in Wilcox with this information. There had been a murder. It was a guy named Cody. He bragged that he had killed somebody, and he had used to work for the police department, and his father was a big shot cop. Well, Wilcox was no bigger than, it wasn't even as big as, I don't even think it was as big as Bisbee. It was a tiny little place. Everybody knew each other. The detective immediately knew who they were talking to, and he calls up Cody and says, "What do you know about this?" I don't know whether he expected Cody to say, "Oh yes, I did this." He said, "Oh, just rumors in Wilcox, you know how they go." I don't know why he called. It was a totally useless call. Sorry, the light's in my eyes. So that was on August 29th. And meanwhile, the next day, the kid had gone to see his grandmother, who lived in Safford. And he was supposed to be back by the 25th, I think. And he didn't come back. So she was worried. She had a terrible premonition that he was not gonna, that something horrible had happened. So she, on the 30th, she put together posters, picture of her grandson with a description, and she went and she posted them all over Safford. And then, because she had found out, she had called Chad's father, who was her son-in-law, and said, "Have you heard from him? Because he's not gotten in touch with me." The son-in-law said, no, I haven't heard from him. But he said he made some calls before he left. Let me get the phone bills. So he found the phone bills, and there were some calls made to Wilcox. So he gave his former mother-in-law the phone numbers, and she called them. And one of them was a phone picked up by a young woman. And she said, "My grandson called this number a few weeks ago, and I'm looking for him. He's in Arizona." And the woman didn't even say, "Who is your grandson?" She said, "Nobody's here. Call back tomorrow." And she hung up because she knew what had happened to him. So she filed a missing person. The interesting thing to me was that from August 23rd, which is the day after the murder, or a few days after the murder, 25th or so, there was a report placed in the Wilcox Police Department of a murder. They had all the information about they didn't know who it was. They didn't have a number of the victim, but they had the name of the killer and where it happened and where the body was buried. When the kids who heard about this murder called the Tucson detective, the detective wrote a report, and communicated with Deming, this detective in Wilcox. There was a report from that attorney. Then the car was discovered, and there was that's when they discovered who the victim was, because they tracked the car. The guys had rolled up the license plate and put it in the back seat. And when the police found this abandoned car, the homicide detective in Tucson said, "Well, that's it. That's the car from the murder." So sent all the information to the detective in Wilcox, who still did nothing. By now they had the name of the victim. So by the time, and then time went on, and there were all these reports, but nobody did anything. They tried to put they tried to put together a taped call to try to trap Cody into saying something, but the guy that they tried to get Tom, one of his buddies in Tucson, to call, and they were going to tape it, and Tom would ask about that night in Tucson where they hid all the stuff. So Tom immediately said, "Oh yeah, I'll do it," but called Cody and told him he was going to do it. So the phone call was absolutely pointless. So the story goes on, and the Justin and the killer and the two girls and Justin moved to Tucson to get out of Wilcox. They all got jobs. Justin hated these people, didn't want to be with them. And finally, when Cody got a different job, he realized he could make his own way, just not go home, not go back to the hotel. And he had some friends in Tucson, so he got out of that whole ring. And
Ooh, Margo.
Hold on, Margo, we've lost you. Okay, everybody, let's just take a pause here. I think Margo's connection dropped. So I'll be right back. Okay.
okay, so anyway, so Justin kind of began to put a little life together. He didn't want to be around these people. He hated them. He didn't trust them. And I mean, he was terrified that the big guy was really big. Justin at the time was 5'8". He was 19 years old. He was 18 or 19 years old. And he weighed about 115 pounds. So the other guy was almost 300 pounds and 6'4". So I mean, anyone would be intimidated by anybody that size, particularly someone who had killed another human being. He put a life together. He got a job, and he actually found a girlfriend, and they were going to get married, a really nice girl, and going to the university. And then one day he was picked up and charged with first-degree murder. So his life came to a screeching halt. The body was not found. They did not arrest anybody. They had been in Tucson and everything was going along. They were not together. And then the body was found on January 3rd, 1997 in the desert by a hunter. And that's when Cody was arrested. And a week or two later, after Cody had talked to his dad, and that part isn't in the book because I didn't realize that until I had spoken with Justin more recently. In any event, the interviews went on for a year. I'm trying to find another little part that might be interesting for you to read. Well, here's what happened 2 weeks before trial, or the week before trial. It was a week before the trial. One of the last minute tasks for the attorneys was to prepare their clients who had spent the previous year in jail for their day in court. They would need a haircut and clothes that fit, so the jurors will see a human being they could identify with. Clothes and personal grooming humanizes defendants. So, and our office maintained a closet with men and women's clothes in various sizes. It was our costume. We called it our costume closet. And so I selected some things for Justin to try on. If they fit, we'd have them cleaned and pressed. The jail was 5 minutes from the office, a 10-minute drive. As I walked into the jail with an armload of clothes, the receptionist jumped up and said, "You have to go back to the office. There's an emergency." 10 minutes before, when I left, there'd been no emergency, and Jim, the department head, was in the office. I was not the department head. It just didn't make sense. I left the clothing with the receptionist, asked her to have Justin select 2 or 3 outfits for trial, and said I would be back in the morning to pick them up for laundry. And she was a lovely woman and agreed to do it. I got back to our office in the old 1907 Bisbee High School building and was almost knocked over at the front door by Hallie, an attorney in our office and also Jim's girlfriend. She was sobbing noisily as she headed out of the building towards the parking lot. I turned around and followed her, hollering, "Hallie, what happened? What's going on?" She didn't even look up, got in her car and drove off. I knew that if the situation involved Hallie, Jim would not be able to handle it. He hired her despite warnings from everyone in the department, as well as the personnel manager for the county. He did it anyway. She had worked in the office for a few months and animosities were growing, especially with Chuck, Jim's former best friend and our paralegal. The edginess in the office created by her relationship to the boss had begun to disturb the smooth running of the office. Jim would invite Hallie into his office to go over her cases, and close the door for long periods of time. The rest of us received brief visits from him in our office where he would casually ask how things were going. We'd respond, buried in work, and he would say, "Great, thanks, God bless you." The romance got a few snickers, but little other attention because we were all too busy. The office perked along, but the hostility between Chuck and Hallie became more overt, and that afternoon it had erupted. I stepped back into the office from the hall. I saw Chuck waving a tape recorder at Jim, the veins in his neck popping out, screaming, "Say it again, Jim, say it again. Say what you want to do to me." Jim, equally red-faced, the veins in his neck also visible, shaking his fist at Chuck, bellowed, "Get the hell out of here, get the hell out of here." The secretaries sat still at their desk staring. One of them, Molly, approached me and said, "I didn't know what else to do. Everything blew up and it was crazy. I had to get you back here." Anyway, that was a week before trial. And I was put in charge of the entire office. The county administrator, Jody, came over. He had also been summoned. And he put me in charge of the office a week before trial. And then the trial started on January 14th. I don't want to go through too much of it. I don't spend a lot of time during the trial, but the trial had some interesting points. Justin did testify. I don't know that that was a good decision. I think probably Jim and I just working together it was a dumb decision on my part to agree to go on with the trial without more time, having just been put in charge of the department that was in such horrible, it was just ghastly. They had filed restraining orders against each other, and that's in the book too. So why did you do that? Why did you unplug it?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't want to go blank again.
No. It has a battery.
Are there any questions? I should tell you something about being a defense attorney. It's really different from being a prosecutor. You do
I always did assume that my client was innocent unless I knew. A lot of times my clients were guilty, had told everybody what they did. And my job was really to just save the day as best I could, minimize the time, find explanations and try to keep them from going to prison for the rest of their lives. Most of my cases had to do with drug loads, so they were pretty familiar to me. But this time, I knew that this kid had not killed anybody. He finally, it took me weeks to get even communicating with him because he was frightened. He was frightened, and it took quite a long time to get the story out of him. And he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years, minimum 25, life in prison, not to be released for a minimum of 25 years. He's still in prison. And I should tell you that Arizona has no parole, and the people in prison do not care about lifers. He's a lifer. They make no effort they do not, the statutes in Arizona do not respect the 25 years that the judges impose. They do that with a reason, 25 years. He's had an impeccable record. There's absolutely no, he's no threat to anyone on this planet. He's mild-mannered. He's an artist and a writer. He's an intellectual. And so he's stuck in prison. I'm trying to now work with him in trying to get him out of prison. The Arizona Justice Project has his case, and hopefully we'll start working on it. They start working on cases as they are received, one by one. They haven't started actually working on it, but I sent them a copy of my book. And he has sent in 2 applications, so they're aware of his case. I got a call from one of them. But it's a very tragic situation that the word justice really doesn't have much to do with anything, at least in Arizona. I don't know what I've practiced in other states, but not done criminal law in other states. So I wrote this book years after I had represented Justin. I ran into Betsy Thornton, who's a writer and who was the victim witness on this case. And she said I should write the book because she said it was such a terrible case. It was the worst miscarriage of justice she had ever seen. And that's how I had viewed it from the time that verdict came in. The whole thing was just a miscarriage of justice, in my opinion. Does anybody have questions?
Well, Margo, Betsy was a witness in this?
No, Betsy used to work for the county attorney's office as a victim witness. She wasn't a witness, but she watched the whole trial. She watched all of the motions.
Oh, I see.
She was in every aspect of the trial that the jury was not. In many aspects of the trial, the jury is nowhere near the courtroom. There are all the things that the jury never hears. The jury never heard that my client took a polygraph exam and polished and passed it with flying colors. There was just no evidence at all that he knew anything, that he touched the boy in any way. But the jury didn't know that because they're not admissible in Arizona or anywhere else. I don't know why they're not, but they use them for other things, but not for trials.
So Margo, could you talk a little bit about, the process of writing this? You've dropped some hints that are actually really fascinating, but did you have all of your trial notes and the files? Were you able to, use that documentation from that time as something to refer to? And also, you mentioned something you found out recently in terms of Cody talking to his dad. I'm not asking you to give anything away, but it's very interesting how your process has continued into the present, that this is a present story of somebody's life today has been
Right.
jeopardized and is in prison.
Sure. I started writing when I started writing the book, I was part of a writers group with Donna Shell and Nancy Williams and Kathy Ruffel. And so, and what I did was I went into my old office and I got the files and I made notes and I copied some documents, and it was a totally different format than this book. I wasn't sure whether I'd write it as a novel or as whether I'd use the names or just make up names and base a story on it. I just wasn't sure. I knew I should write it because it was an offensive story. So I did have those. I made all those notes and I worked on it for quite a while. I don't know, a couple of years. And then the writing group disbanded. Then I stopped, and then I'd stop and start. And then at one point, my computer was stolen, and I didn't have anything backed up anywhere. It was just in there. And so I lost the whole thing. And so it was in 2019. For some reason, I said, well, I think I should just, if I'm going to do this, I should start over and just start over and tell the damn story. Don't get into, the things that you were into before. So I made an outline and I started working on the story. And then COVID came along. So I was trapped in my house, and that's what I did. I wrote, I went to the dog park and to Safeway, and that was about it. I finally got to the point where I was finished, and I was looking for an editor because I did think I should have an editor. I think it was Kathy Clifton. It was one of the people who said, you better get an editor because nobody can find everything, all the stupid repetitions and silly mistakes. So I tried Holly Whitman, who had no interest at all in working for me. She just said, go over it again. So I went over it again and again and again, and finally found an editor through Kelly Crittenden, who had a friend who was a professional editor. And I worked with her to put the book together. It was really a wonderful experience. I mean, she was a great editor. I mean, she just brought my writing to life. I said, did I write that? I must have written it. I mean, it was my writing, but she made it so much better than I was just tired of looking at you get tired of looking at your own writing over and over and over again. It's just there.
Never underestimate the value and power of an editor. It's very important. And for exactly the reason that you just described, you have read it and written it and read it so many times. You need fresh eyes. So that's really wonderful that you found somebody that you worked well with. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Kathy, do you want to unmute?
You're mute. You're muted, Kathy.
I know, I'm not anymore.
Oh,
okay. One thing that struck me when I read it that I thought was the most, you keep using the word chilling, and this really was chilling, to see these lost kids. I mean, the girls, the older guy who was the murderer, the victim, they were all just these lost kids that we still see around here on a daily basis.
It could have been any of them.
It could have been anybody, right? And it really moved me because it's such a horrible thing that happened to this boy. And I just wonder, Margo, you've worked with a lot of kids since then in your career as a judge and as an advocate. Um, do you see any, I mean, what could people do for kids like that? Is there any answer? Is there any way to solve this? I mean, it wasn't just that it was a legal miscarriage, which it certainly was, but it was just that these poor kids were defenseless in the first place because they had nobody.
How did all this happen?
Yeah.
I don't know. I personally, like Desley, the girl, the girlfriend of the murderer, she had been with this boy since she was 16 years old. Like, why? Whose mother would let you move in with somebody who was over 18 when they're 16? What kind of a mother would do that? I don't know anything about the other girl. They had just been best friends since the 7th grade. That's all I knew about them. And I have no idea what happened to that other girl. I can find no hide nor hair of her anywhere. I tried to track down, Desley lives in Tucson. Her mother worked for the sheriff's department. I don't, it could have happened to anybody. It's just kids starting out on their own. They don't know anything and think they know everything. I mean, we were all like that. We were all 18 and 19 years old. Desley had a fascination with gangs and crime. I think she had a criminal mind. And that was just her. I don't think Annalie was not like that. The other girl was not like that at all. And I don't know what you can do. There's not much you can do about, keep track of your kids.
Yeah.
That sounds like a silly thing, but like
No,
my friend Paul said, that could have happened to any of us. We were always, flopping on someone's couch for a week or two. And something like that could have happened. I don't know. It's such a weird, it's just a chilling story. And I go through, and the book does contain everything that happened. And it was in the testimony. So I put it together from that. But it was a horrible thing. And with respect to the fact that Justin got arrested after Cody saw his dad, I just put that together because in talking to him recently, I didn't know that when I was writing the book. I knew that Cody had been picked up first.
Yeah, that's really stunning.
But I think, his dad had something to do with the outcome. Cody served 12 years. For manslaughter. They convicted him of manslaughter. And there in no way did the evidence suggest manslaughter. I don't know how Reuben did it. My friend, what's her name? The lawyer, the tall Ann Carl says, you got to call Reuben and talk to him about your book. And I've been reluctant to do that, but I should do it because, I would like to know what he would have done had he had my client. I'd like to have that conversation with him. I don't know what he did to get his father's testimony in, and I didn't even know about that during the trial. We had one trial with 2 juries that were going in and out of the courtroom at all times. It was like a 3-ring circus.
So a different jury for each defendant?
Right.
But one trial.
One trial. Yeah.
Wow.
It's the first and only time that's ever been done in Cochise County. And they're very rarely done anywhere.
Interesting. Does anybody else have any questions for Margo? just unmute yourself.
Well, Margo, it's Joan, and I'm just saying thank you for, inspiring work. I mean, it just seems like you had the patience, persistence, fortitude, whatever, and that's very wonderful. And I'm sorry that story is so sad. I agree with Kathy. It's just very sad, and those things happen all the time. But thank
Yeah.
you for your work.
Thank you. Thank you very
Mhm.
much.
Oh.
And it's wonderful. I also that you are working, towards the future, that this isn't a dead subject. This is, written, and also your actions about, hopefully rectifying this injustice and, working towards proving his innocence. I'm just in such admiration of you. And it also really highlights the power of telling your story, telling a story to change the world, right? To use your voice and tell your story to make a difference. It's so important, and I thank you for representing in this way. It's just really important, and we're lucky to have you, Margo.
Well, that's my hope, that someone will do something. I was astonished to realize that this law that takes away parole, I mean, he's not the only one who is in prison for life with the possibility of parole in 25 years. He had one friend who was released and then picked up 2 weeks later saying, "Oh no, there is no parole, so you don't get to be out here. You have to go back to prison." And he was pulled back to prison. I mean, the prisons in Arizona are full of these people, and the system is so disgusting. I did talk with Katie Hobbs when she was here about this law, because I think it's a criminal law to not have parole for people when they've served their time. It's like keeping people in prison for their lives when they're not even sentenced to an entire lifetime.
For profit.
It's and we have these for-profit prisons. So she did tell me, Katie did say that the whole criminal justice system was on her list of things to mend if she's elected, which I hope she will be.
Are there any other questions for Margo on the book? On this story?
If you haven't read the book, it's at the bookstore.
And we have copies at the Copper Queen Library. And so, Margo, is the best way to get a copy through Bisbee Books and Music?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you want to buy it or if you want to read it, just go to the library.
And can people order it online? Is it available?
Yes, you can also order it on Amazon.
Okay. So again, Under the Wheels of Justice by Margo Macartney. And thank you, Margo, for not being such an important part of our community, but for now being a Bisbee author, a writer, and a storyteller, and adding to the important amount of work here representing our community. So, and thank you all so much for being here on this Tuesday night. It's so wonderful to see all your faces.
I just want to say one thing. This is Elise.
I took over her computer.
That's okay.
You can turn it.
That, I read different incarnations of the book as it went along and made some suggestions, but I just want to congratulate Margo. I'm so proud of her for doing this book. And I found it like just a wonderful read as far as, I couldn't stop reading it. And I knew about the story because she had talked about it in her life, and I've heard her speak with Justin, and to me, I just hope and pray that that he can get out of jail, and that actually, I hope somebody will just, commute his sentence totally, or not just commute it, what's that called? Pardon him. I hope that
Yeah.
somebody will pardon
He
him.
really needs to pardon, because if you read the book, you find that he was convicted illegally. I mean, it was, the judge, I don't know where the judge was. I don't know where his head was. But
Well, thank
the
you.
jury instructions were full of, you know what. Anyway,
Thank you. Thank you, Elise, for that. And thank you so much, Margo. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
thank you,
Bye.
Margo.
Thank you, Margo.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.